The United States has a backup plan for almost everything. Not just oil. Gold, wheat, helium, even raw uranium are sitting in government-controlled stockpiles right now, built specifically for the day everything goes wrong. Most people have heard of one of these. Today, we're covering every single one. The most famous one? The Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Created after the 1973 oil crisis, it's the largest emergency oil supply in the world. Hundreds of millions of barrels stored in underground salt caverns along the Gulf Coast in Texas and Louisiana. Salt caverns aren't random. Salt naturally seals itself around the storage space, making it cheap and remarkably leak-resistant. The reserve exists for one reason. If oil imports are ever cut off by war, embargo, or disaster, the president can release millions of barrels a day to stabilize the country without waiting on the global market. Next is the Strategic National Stockpile, the country's emergency medical supply. It holds ventilators, vaccines, antibiotics, and protective equipment split across secret warehouse locations so a single disaster can't wipe it out. It was built in 1999, originally to prepare for bioterrorism, and most Americans had never heard of it until 2020, when it became one of the most talked-about stockpiles in the country. Then there's the National Defense Stockpile, a reserve of raw materials, not finished goods. Rare earth elements, titanium, cobalt, tungsten, the minerals that go into fighter jets, missiles, and semiconductors. The catch: a huge share of these materials are normally imported, often from countries the U.S. doesn't always get along with. This stockpile exists so the defense industry can keep building even if those supply chains get cut off overnight. Helium gets its own reserve. The Federal Helium Reserve, stored underground near Amarillo, Texas, was originally built to supply military airships, but helium turned out to be critical for MRI machines, semiconductor manufacturing, and rocket launches. It's a non-renewable resource once it escapes Earth's atmosphere, which is exactly why the government has been protecting a supply of it since the 1920s. You've definitely heard of this one by its nickname, Fort Knox. Officially, the United States Bullion Depository, it holds a significant portion of the country's gold reserves behind blast doors, armed guards, and a vault built to survive almost anything short of a direct nuclear strike. It's less about emergency use and more about something simpler, proving the value behind the currency in everyone's pocket. Most people have never heard of this one. The Bill Emerson Humanitarian Trust is the modern version of America's old strategic grain reserve, wheat held in reserve specifically for international food aid during famines and humanitarian crises. The original grain reserve was scrapped in 2008, but the country kept a smaller emergency supply just repurposed for feeding people abroad instead of stabilizing prices at home. The Northeast gets its own dedicated reserves, a heating oil reserve and a gasoline supply reserve, both specifically for the Northeast United States. Why a regional reserve? Because that part of the country relies heavily on heating oil through brutal winters, and it's geographically isolated from the refineries that supply it. A single supply disruption up there can mean the difference between a bad week and a public health emergency. And the newest one on this list? The DOE Uranium Reserve, authorized in 2020. As nuclear power gets renewed federal attention, the U.S. realized it had become dangerously dependent on foreign-enriched uranium. So it started building its own domestic reserve, specifically to keep American nuclear reactors running without relying on supply chains the country doesn't control. Oil, medicine, minerals, gold, wheat, fuel, and now uranium. 8 different reserves, each built for a different version of the same question. What happens if the normal supply chain breaks? Which of these surprised you the most? Let me know below and subscribe, because next time we're covering a system most people don't even know exists.